Welcome back to the McCann Dogs podcast, episode 62. And today we're going to talk about something that people often struggle with their dog training. Now, I don't know if you consider yourself a step skipper, but if you're struggling with one of your dog's skills, then you may have in fact missed a crucial part of their training. Now, Instructor Shannon has put together a list of things that you need to keep in mind when you're training a new skill so that you don't do any step skipping. I'm Ken Steep, and welcome back to McCann Dogs. Shannon, let's talk about someone being a step skipper.
Let's talk about the step skipping.
Yes. So in this article, which, it did really well when you first published it on Facebook, and I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to, and it's something that we often see in ourselves when we're in a rush to do more with our dogs. We want to take them more places and, have them be successful. And oftentimes we may hurry this process, thinking that our dog is maybe better at walking on leash or they have a better response to name or recall. So we inevitably skip some steps. And you created this acronym to help people to better understand, the process that they need to go through with their dog to help them to be successful. And what is the acronym?
The acronym is T.R.A.I.N. It is teach, rehearse, add distractions, increase expectations, and then new places. And I came up with this because inevitably, the people that say my dog is stubborn, the people that say my dog is untrainable, the people that say my dog frustrates me, those people, when they come to us and say those things and we clarify what they've done in their training, there's almost always a step that has been skipped. There's almost always something that has been overlooked in the training process. So the dog has not learned the complete picture, the complete acronym. They've been sort of educated a little bit on what the person is trying to teach them, but there's still huge holes in their learning and in their training. So I wanted to come up with something that if you go through all of these steps and sort of, as a broad rule and something that we can easily remember, if you go through all of these steps, you're going to get a great skill in the end. So if you can try to simplify and break things down in your mind with the skill that you're trying to teach your dog with these 5 steps, you are going to have success in the end, as opposed to the holes from being a step skipper.
Now, as I look at the thumbnail that you created for the acronym, I was thinking this might make for a great fridge magnet because it's so clear and it's so apparent, what you're talking about. I know currently all of our students get a fridge magnet that talks about the 10 most dangerous household poisons, but maybe the T.R.A.I.N, the T.R.A.I.N, would make a great magnet for our students.
I think you're absolutely right. I really like that idea.
So to start things off, let's talk about the T, which refers to teach in your acronym.
Yeah, and this is the obvious one. If we want our dogs to learn how to sit, for example, we need to teach them how to sit. And I don't think people skip this step nearly as much as some of the other steps. So if you have a skill that you want to teach your dog, you need to start slowly. You need to start in a quiet environment without any competing distractions, and you need to go through the teaching phase. And I always like to have as close to a perfect skill as I can in that environment before I start to get into the other steps. So with some things like recall, etc., it's far too broad of a topic to be able to in a small area or in a small training session. But something like a sit, for example, you can teach your dog how to physically get into the sit position quite easily using food lure or using some capturing or some shaping, whatever method you want to use to teach that skill. You're going to be able to get a good sit cue probably pretty quickly in your house. And that's the teaching phase. And that's where I want to make sure that my dog understands the skill from start to finish. Depending on what skill it is, I may or may not, add in the final process, like my cue, making sure that I've added distractions, et cetera, but definitely that first step, all I'm going to do is make sure that my dog understands the skill, can perform that skill, and has had a fair opportunity without a whole bunch of distractions or competing motivators to learn that skill in its entirety.
I love the fact that this would apply. The teach part applies to any methodology, any skill, anything that you're doing, no matter how you're training it. The teach part is the jumping off point. It's and certainly one of the more important parts of this entire thing. Now, when you talk about the dogs being more successful, making reasonable progressions, that certainly comes with practice and rehearsal. And I know the R stands for rehearse. And talk about why rehearsal is so important when it comes to these new skills for your dog.
Yeah, it's the practice portion of things. If you think about any new skill that you're learning how to drive a car, for example, you learn the idea of how the car works first, and then you need to physically get into the car and you need to practice driving so that there becomes a certain amount of muscle memory, there becomes a certain amount of automatic response after rehearsal is in play. Now, what's so important about rehearsal is that we've all heard practice makes perfect. I like to say perfect practice makes perfect, because if you're rehearsing the same thing over and over again and that is incorrect, you are actually shooting yourself in the foot. So if, for example, I take my sit skill on the road and I think, oh, my dog's great at sitting in the house, so he's going to be able to sit anywhere. And I go out and about and I go to the park and he's distracted and I tell him to sit and he doesn't because he's distracted, or he doesn't sit because there's another person saying hello to him or something of that nature. I'm actually rehearsing allowing my dog to hear those cues and find them completely inconsequential. I don't ever want my dog to think that he can tune out my voice and that's okay, because then I have to go back and I have to nag at him to get things right. So what I need to do is I need to make sure that that rehearsal is great rehearsal. So anytime I set my dog up until he's, proficient on the word sit and he can sit in any scenario, I need to make sure that I'm setting myself up for success. So after the teaching phase, I'm definitely going to change things a little bit, but I'm not going to change them so much that my dog has that opportunity to at the park, hear sit, not really be focused enough to get it right in that scenario, and then of course be wrong and rehearse that incorrect thing. Or, to put it in another way, if he was rehearsing something that was not a sit, for example, if every time I said sit, he laid down, that rehearsal is eventually going to teach him that sit means lie down, and that's going to create more and more confusion. So keep in mind that you need to get in a certain amount of repetition in a lot of different environments as well with dogs in order to expect them to truly understand that skill. So rehearsing the right behavior is going to make all the difference in the world.
I like the saying that practice makes permanent. And I mean, certainly you can retrain or untrain some of these things, but if you're thinking in your mind that what I'm doing is ultimately what I'm going to get, it's really helpful. It's really helpful for, to sort of as an overarching idea to your dog training, to be a little bit more self-aware with what you're rewarding, with what you're getting when you're working with your dog. We've often talked about how dogs don't make these great generalizations. And this is certainly a huge part of rehearsal. And just talk about that just for a moment, about generalizations and how dogs see the world a little bit differently than we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say, we can generalize as humans. We're really, really good at it. I can walk into a Sobeys and figure out how to find tomatoes in a Sobeys. I can walk into a No Frills and figure out how to find tomatoes in a No Frills, even though the color scheme and the building and everything is completely different. As humans, we are able to generalize and go into situations and figure things out easily. Dogs are not the same in that respect. They need that rehearsal over a bunch of different environments. And popular opinion says anywhere from 50 to 100 repetitions in a new location before you can really consider that to be a successful skill. So we need to do a lot of work, not just sit in the house and then expect it to work out there in the real world. We need to teach sit in the house and then move out to different locations, etc. And that's all part of the rest of this acronym as well. But we need to rehearse that perfect skill in new environments, and we need to have them rehearse it getting it right. And that's the point where they're going to be able to generalize and go into a new environment, hear the word sit, and be able to recognize the word right away, be able to function enough in the distraction of the environment that they can get it right, and be able to offer you that attentiveness in order to be able to get it right. So the generalization comes with repetition and with rehearsal.
For any of our non-Canadian listeners, Sobeys and No Frills are both grocery stores. Just in case you're wondering, what the hell is she talking about? It doesn't make sense to me. Is it like some sort of some weird vegetable shop of some kind? But that's what she's talking about. And they're also local to McCann Dog Training Facility, so we often refer to those things.
They're tomato salespeople.
Yes, yeah, they're strictly tomatoes. Tomatoes of every kind. Beefsteak, cherry. I mean, the list goes on. I don't know any other kinds, but because I don't eat tomatoes, but I'm sure there's a lot more we could talk about.
Yeah.
Now, once you've rehearsed that skill in new environments and you're seeing some success, what's the next step? What's the next challenge that you're bringing to your dog to make them even more reliable with their skills?
Adding in the distractions, and the distractions are something that you can set up with your dog. I rarely leave the training phase of things to chance and get out there in the real world and hope actions I come across are going to be something that my dog can contend with at that point. So I will probably overanalyze a little bit too much, but I will set my environment up. And this is where I find keeping a training journal really comes in handy. I'll make a lot of notes on the distractions that I used, the repetition that I did. Like at the end of any training session, I will take 2 or 3 minutes and just jot down what I did with the dog, where we had success, where we had challenges. And that way, when I come back to it, either the next day or a couple of days later, I've got a good idea of where I'm at with my training and how I'm going to continue to afford my dog to have success. And that's all part of the planning thing. So with adding distractions, I'll often start, we're using the example of sit. So we'll stay with that. If I'm in the house and I'm working on sit and my dog's getting it right in, sort of a padded room with nothing going on, now I'm going to start things in. So I might go into a different room in the house where maybe my partner is hanging out or maybe the other dogs are hanging out. And I'm going to work that sit exercise, not over facing my dog and letting the other dogs come and be right on my puppy's space or anything like that. But basically just putting my dog in a scenario where there is a little extra distraction and I still have the same expectations for him. He still needs to sit when I ask him to sit, even though there's that other distraction in the room. I'll go outside in the backyard and I will throw toys and food, etc., in the grass. And of course, I make sure that I make a mental note where all those things are, especially the food and grass, because it can get a little bit hidden. But it's a really nice thing to be able to get your dog distracted, get them wandering and thinking about that smell of food, and then try your skill and see how they do. And of course, you can moderate that distraction as much as you'd like. So I could use a piece of kibble in the grass and I could be 15 feet away from it, or I could use a piece of steak in the grass and I could be 2 feet from it, depending on where my dog is with his level of success. And distractions are anything that's competing in the environment. So once I've mastered distractions with the setup in my house and in my yard, I'm going to take things on the road and I might bring some distractions with me to add to the environments that I'm going to, or I may just let the environment be the distraction itself. Again, very dependent on my dog's level of success at that point, but my ideal situation is that I'm building on those distractions. So once my dog can handle the kibble at 15 feet away, I'm going to move in 10 feet from the kibble. I'm going to try the steak at 15 feet away. I'm going to mix things up so that my dog gets all sorts of repetition and rehearsal of the right thing with those added distractions in, but at a point where he can be and he can get that, that history of reinforcement built into him surrounding distractions.
Something that's really interesting that you made me think of, and anyone that's taken a psychology course will recognize the name Pavlov. He's a Russian scientist. He did lots of work on classical conditioning, but something that even a lot of the psychology professors don't know because it's less important to them is that when Pavlov tried to demonstrate his findings on classical conditioning, where he'd ring a bell and the dog would salivate, when he tried to present it to some of his colleagues, he set up the same scenario, same experiment, and then presented it in front of his colleagues and didn't get the same result. He also found that with, some of the scientists he had working with him and performing some of these experiments, they would have these findings, and then they would call him into the room, and the dog wouldn't they weren't getting the same results. What he determined, and again, this is something that a dog trainer really needs to know about, or a dog owner should be very aware of, is that he decided it was called investigatory reflex, I think, an investigatory reflex, so that the dog was distracted enough to pay attention to whatever the change in environment was, and in this case it was people. But even with all of the conditioning, they needed to be introduced to these people. And I mean, it's evolutionary with dogs, of course. I mean, they've had to for self-preservation and to keep themselves alive, they need to be very aware of their environment. And I just thought that was an interesting thing to throw in, is that Pavlov's findings on this exact, and you can apply this knowledge to what you're doing at home with your dog, really understanding that you're not going to get the same results when you change the environment, when you change the level of distraction. So you do need to, as Shannon mentioned, sort of slowly increase the level of distraction. Now, along with increasing the level of distraction, you're going to increase your expectations, Shannon, and that's the eye of the train. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, most definitely. I was just thinking, actually, as you were talking about Pavlov's dog and that realization, just before we get to the next one, I thought, and that's the point where somebody would think that dog's being stubborn. If we didn't know better, and we didn't know that there's no way that dog, when the association is just ringing a bell means food, there's no way, if that dog understood that theory 100%, he would say, I'm not interested in the food, right? It just wouldn't happen. Yep, so that response of drooling, that's a really interesting point. I really like that. So increased expectations. Sorry, I'll get us back on track here. This is actually my favorite stage, and I love the point where the dog understands things and I'm starting to challenge them. And this is actually the point where I will often start to wean away from the food rewards as well. So obviously, I do not expect to have to reward my dog every time he sits for the rest of his life. I can't. Reggie at 11 years old, I can't think of the last time I ever rewarded him just for sitting. So, I mean, we need to get from the point where we're rewarding a lot and building reinforcement to the point where the dog is expected to perform the behavior without necessarily getting a cookie every single time. And how I can make my dog want to earn that cookie is by increasing my expectations. So making this skill more complicated, I might look for a different criteria in how fast he sits. I might look for a different criteria in the physical way that he sits. I might want him specifically to tuck his rear underneath him rather than rocking back into the sit, depending on what I'm teaching for. I might start to work on a more remote sit. So, if he's 6 feet from me and I say sit, expecting him to suddenly put on the brakes and sit at that point where he happens to be, adding in some elements that are going to breed a true understanding for the dog. That's the thing. When you break things down into better pieces or more specific pieces of information for the dog, and you start proofing through things, that's where your confidence lies. That's where your dog's confidence will come from. When they get repetition of being right, even though they're being challenged, we want our dogs to be willing to offer us some sort of a behavior. I want my dog to always try. I don't want him to be worried about getting things wrong. So the worst thing that happens in a lot of these scenarios, if he doesn't, if I ask him to sit and he takes 2 or 3 seconds to sit, I'm going to give him a pat on the head. I'm going to tell him he's a good dog. What a great dog. But if you want the cookie, you've got to work harder than that. The next time I ask him to sit, if I get a split second sit, that's where the cookie's going to come into play. Increasing those expectations and really keeping the rewards of the food, the toys, the really high value rewards for when they've given you a performance that's worthy of that is going to help build their confidence. It's going to help proof through the skill. It's going to help really clarify for that dog exactly what it is that you're asking them to do.
I love that idea. And I think this is exactly why we use something like Jackpot Rewarding. If you've had consistently had some good sits from your dog, and then all of a sudden they give you a great performance. And if you're not familiar with Jackpot Rewarding for our listeners, you can have several treats. You're going to reward your dog several times in a row. Rather than giving them a whole handful of treats, you're going to give them 5, 6 or whatever rewards in a row, because they see that as really valuable. But you really make a big deal when they work a little bit bit harder, when they respond a little bit faster. And as Shannon mentioned, as you increase your expectations, you're going to see your dog trying to follow along, trying to be a little faster, be a little better. And Jackpot Rewarding is a great way to do that. Now, it also keeps it fun. It keeps it fun for you. It keeps it fun for your dog. And regardless of what your expectations might be, whether it's just, to have your dog not jump up on you anymore, the process, the learning should provide some value, some emotional value to you and your dog. The more fun it is, the more likely you are to do it. So as you maybe find new challenges, you maybe set a new expectation for your dog. Most of us, I think deep down, even if we don't think we're competitive people, we're quite competitive people, and we want our dogs to be successful. It's really a fun way of making training more fun.
For sure. I like to say it leaves a lasting impression. Whenever I use jackpotting in my training with my dogs, I always notice a marked improvement in whatever that skill was the next time. And I don't mean a marked improvement in that it wasn't going well before. I mean a marked improvement in that my dog, that jackpot did leave a lasting impression, and he can't wait to get that skill out again so that hopefully he gets another jackpot. And I don't usually use more than one jackpot in a row unless it's something extremely, like if I'm practicing recalls off of live animals or that nature, I might really make sure that I'm jackpotting as many times as possible. But for the most part, I want that jackpot really stand out in my dog's head. So I use it sparingly, but I use it well. And you will see with your own dogs as well. When you use that jackpot well, you'll see how much of a lasting impression it leaves on them.
I think that's a good point. Your dog has sort of moved the bar higher, and at that point, they won't be getting another jackpot unless they give you even greater performance. So that's probably a good thing for our listeners to keep in mind. Now, when you're talking about having more fun, doing training in different places, whatever it is, as you're challenging your dog, you do need to do it and try it in different locations, in different environments, places that might be more stimulating, more exciting, maybe just louder. I mean, let's talk about the N in your train. And it's all about, it used to be called Now Take It on the Road, but I see that you've changed that to new places. Maybe it's a little more clear this way.
Yeah, we thought so. There was a discussion about it around here, and I sort of threw it out there for a vote, and the vote came back as new places. So fine and dandy, that's great. Places are so important. My rule of thumb when I have a young dog or when I'm training a new skill, for example, right now, Ned he is getting ready to compete in the higher levels of obedience. So we are working and proofing and teaching all sorts of new things. When I'm teaching a new skill, my rule of thumb is I try to get to 3 new locations per week. And that might seem overwhelming when you think about it in that grand context, but when you actually put it into practical use, it's not a big deal. So I find that I'm lucky that I get to take my dogs to work with me every day. So they're always with me traveling. So I can stop at a park on the way home, pop out and do 5 minutes worth of healing. And it's so easy, and it's on my way, and it's just part of our routine now. Or I'll stop to get something at Sobeys, maybe some tomatoes or No Frills, and I'll pop out of the car and we'll do a sit stay in the No Frills parking lot, someplace safe, obviously. So there's a second place. And then, maybe I'm just taking my dog for a walk and I take a new route, and here's a schoolyard that I've never practiced at before. So I'm going to practice that skill in the schoolyard. So, by the time you count those 3 places, it's really not hard to get to 3 different places. But that's the effort, and that's what's going to help your dog generalize. So putting in the time to get the repetitions done, making sure that you have the learning in place, and then getting out to, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a hugely distracting environment. It just has to be different. Sometimes you'll find that your dogs find specific environments really, really difficult for whatever reason. You might go into a quiet building and there's one distraction in the entire place and your dog is completely fixated on that. Or you might find that you come to an obedience class, and because there's so much going on in the whole room, there's not one specific thing for your dog to get distracted by. They're really great and really focused. So we need to know our own dogs. We need to know what we have to do with them in order to get that conditioned response at the end of this game in order to get that great skill. So just think about different locations. It might be the backyard, it might be your neighbor's front yard down the street. It doesn't have to be anything too elaborate initially, but you do want to try to get out eventually to as many different places as possible. And one thing that I would like to add, I know that it's not in the acronym, but sort of maintenance for your training through your dog's entire life is crucial. And I like to get into maintenance mode whenever I see, first off, if I use one of my cues or commands and I don't get a response from my dog, I go right back into training mode. And that might mean I go right back to the start of that train acronym, depending on how long it's been since that skill was really in use, how much my dog has forgotten, how much I feel like he truly understands it anymore. I'll also go into maintenance mode when the seasons change. So, for example, I've already done a lot of recall reminders and response to name reminders with both of my dogs. You know, Reggie at 11 and Ned at 2 and a bit now. We've done lots of spring training reminders because historically I know that when the world changes, everything looks different. You know, it goes from white to green now. The smells are different. Dogs are really excited. And we can't simply hope that those new distractions that they're faced with are still going to be something your dog can contend with. We need to make sure that we do some reminder training. You know, if I was expected to perform calculus once a year, I would make sure that I was doing some reminder training on calculus every once in a while before that time for me to actually be able to function with it was there. So take the time when the seasons change, when you see things starting to slip, get into maintenance mode, go back to the point where you think you need to work with your dog to be successful, but keep in mind that that might mean going right back to the beginning if it's a skill that you've really not used in a long, long time and you want to retrain your dog on it.
I think it's such an important thing to remember, and I'm just thinking now how we can make this image available to our listening audience. I mean, certainly maybe it'll be the thumbnail of the podcast, but it would be great as to be top of mind, because you can literally apply this acronym to every skill in every location, no matter what you're teaching. And I think that's really exciting. And I think that's why it really resonated with so many people, because they realized that they were being a step skipper, and they knew that they needed to be a little bit more focus on progressions with their dog. Now, I know that one place that people can be walked through the process of teaching their dog a new skill, a new trick, is our free monthly workshop. And I know there's lots of people from our podcast who are there. And if you're listening and you're in the free workshop, I want to say hello to you guys and welcome
Hello.
to the workshop. But tell us a little bit about what you have to offer for the free monthly workshop.
Absolutely. We release a free workshop every month. The first of the month, we give you something fun to do with your dogs. Sometimes it's a trick, sometimes it's a skill. This month, we released a remote down workshop, which basically I was talking about the sit a little further away. I like to teach all of my dogs to drop remotely, so that if my dog is 20 feet away from me and I see something and I want to stop my dog's motion right away, I can tell my dog down and he will hit the deck where he happens to be. He's not going to come running into me to do that. And that is a safety skill I have actually used to save one of my dog's life. So it is such an important skill to have. I'm so glad that I teach it to all my dogs at a young age, because when I used it, it was with a young dog, and it really did. Literally, I saved that dog's life with that. So it's a miraculous thing. Totally free. Check it out. Download it in the Facebook group. We're having all sorts of great conversation. People are having all sorts of great success and wins with the workshop, and we'd love to see you. Come and join us.
Something that's really cool about that random down, if you are a dog sports competitor, I know the agility world loves it, because they can be in the middle of training and something doesn't go right. You can ask your dog to lie down and you can go reset the bar or whatever. You know, you don't need to take control of them again. But that is a skill that I've used. Kale and I had to use one time when we were out walking on a trail as a motorized vehicle came zooming up. We told all of our dogs to lie down, and they did, and none of them were in at our side. They were all, relatively close by. But having that down was so helpful. And I just can't imagine not teaching it to a dog with the amount that I get to do with our dogs, the new locations we get to check out. I think it's a crucial skill, and it's fun to teach. And if you're in the workshop, the exciting part I think about the workshop is that every month it's a mystery what the next skill is going to be. So the first day of that month, you get, the course arrives in your email box, and you get to do something fun with your dog. And I'll post a link in the show notes below. If you don't have access to the show notes, check out mccandogs.com, and I think there's a link across the top of our website so that you can get into our Mystery Box workshop crew. And I think you're gonna love it, and that's why I really I love talking about it, because I like seeing how much fun people are having in the group.
Me too.
Now, if this is your first time on our YouTube channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We publish new videos every single week to help you understand the why behind how dogs think and learn. And on that note, I'm Ken, and this is Shannon. Happy training.
Bye, everybody.